Hi everyone, in this video we continue the series dedicated to the analysis of user games, and this time we are going to review the submission of the one of our major supporters, the user with the nickname SpendidParrot. So let us start with the Kurkan game where you play it with black pieces. I think this one is a great example of your major mistakes and major problems, so let's try to analyze it thoroughly. So e4, c6, knight to c3, it's one of the sidelines, one of the most popular sidelines against Caro-Kann, and you responded with a pretty solid system, in my opinion. So you captured on e4 and then played knight to f6. I would say that I used to play this knight c3 and knight f3 stuff against Caro-Kann, and one of the systems that actually provoked me to seriously consider continuing playing that was exactly this knight to f6. So to be honest, I'm not satisfied with the result from white's perspective, and I do believe that knight f6 is exactly what black should try against this system. So knight takes f6, e takes f6, and now the game may transpose into one of the major lines, which is basically this knight f6 against the normal d4 stuff, if white chooses to play d4 here. And I believe that's, well, anyway, it's hard to avoid it, so d4 should be considered on this move or a bit later. And queen e2 is a, well, strange decision in my opinion, because it may be only justified in case you play some like bishop e6 or maybe queen e7. Even bishop e6 is completely fine, but if you correctly respond with the bishop to e7 move, you're more than fine, because now this queen on e2 is quite vulnerable, and that's why instead of playing queen e2 check here, white should consider playing bishop to c4, where after black may try different things, including simple development or maybe queen e7 check. Also interesting option. And if white comes back with the bishop to e2, then something like queen to c7, continuing with the development after bishop d6 castling and so on. So in this position, black has slightly worse pawn structure, but it's really hard for white to do anything there. So queen to e2 was played, you responded with the bishop e7, your opponent continued with the d4, you castled, and now I was really surprised by white's next move, so it was h4. So I understand the idea behind it, obviously, but anyway, it's so inconsistent taking into account what white did before and what is at stake right now, because white is making too many moves that are not development moves, and the king is stuck in the center, so on and so forth. But right now, I don't want to talk about this aspect. I want you to stop the video and use this moment as an exercise to answer the simple question. What is weak after white's h4 move? Whenever you have an answer, you can restart the video. And the answer is pretty simple, I guess. It is actually the g4 square. White is weak exactly after white's h4. Well, basically, it's not necessarily weak, okay? So it's much more vulnerable, I would say. But the concept is the following. So at the moment, g4 cannot be considered a weakness at all, because white still can control it with either f3 or h3, right? Just to protect it with the pawn. But after h4, white is losing one of the potential defenders, which makes g4 much more vulnerable, right? So now, to control that square whenever it is needed, white will have to play f3, which will also weaken some squares. We will talk about it a bit later in this video. But the concept is clear, I guess. Every pawn move leaves something behind, which cannot be controlled by this pawn anymore, which means that certain squares become much more vulnerable after each and every pawn move. What is important in your particular case, I guess, is to just track the changes of this sort, because apparently you don't do it. We will see examples in other games as well, and in this game a bit later. For now, just, well, remember, just keep track of changes that happen after each and every pawn move. Just ask yourself a question: what is weak after this move? All right, and you will have an answer. It doesn't mean you can use such a square immediately, but it's important just to have this in mind, because at some point when it is possible to use it somehow, you will already have this information available for your thinking process. That's the thing. And what's interesting, in this particular case, you can actually use it immediately if you want. So you can just put the bishop there, developing it and pinning the knight on f3 and exerting some additional pressure on the center. So this h4 is indeed a critical weakening of the position, because it gives your bishop an amazing spot where it can be useful and create, well, mid-term pressure on white's position, I would say. So you played rook to e8. Also, absolutely natural decision, taking into account the situation on the e-file. Your opponent responded with the c3. And of course, right now, the most natural desire is somehow to use the e-file to bring the bishop somewhere. So the problem here is that we don't have very satisfactory square for the bishop, actually. So we cannot jump anywhere, attacking something in addition. We cannot win the material right now. If we play something like bishop to d6, let's say, then after bishop e3 and bishop f4, trying to use the fact that the bishop is pinned and castling, we can create sort of a weakness on e3, but it's being protected easily after rook e1, and white has great possibilities to improve the situation later, such as bring the knight to d2 and then at some point playing e4. So I don't think it's a good idea. So we're kind of helping white because we exchange an otherwise bad bishop, right? So if we talk about this bishop on e3, it's quite limited with on pawns. Almost all the pawns are in dark squares. And what we do here, we just play bishop f4 and exchange it. So we solve white's problem, all right? But we can use the weakness of the g4 square here by putting the bishop there, pinning the knight, continuing the development. And after bishop to e3, for example, we may try to complete the development of minor pieces with the help of a knight to a6 move. So why not knight to d7, just like in your game? Well, it's also absolutely playable, I mean the knight d7 stuff. But with the help of knight to a6, we are actually doing the same thing, because if we think about it, if we play knight to d7, so what is the next step, right? So what the knight is doing here on d7? Literally nothing. So we definitely want to relocate it somehow. And most likely the knight will go to d5 next, right? So something like knight to b6 followed by knight to d5. Something that comes to my mind, how to improve this knight. So from a6, the knight can also get to d5 via this c7 square, a slightly different maneuver, but the same result. But there are some additional things, so you don't cover your queen, so in some lines you may try something like queen to d5. So imagine white castles. You may consider something like queen d5 immediately, attacking a2, let's say, and exerting additional pressure on this knight on f3. So you kind of have more options if you put the knight on a6, right? Another thing is that if white is not castling alone, then the knight may support something like c5. And once again, from d7, the knight is also supporting c5, but here it doesn't limit on queen, so queen may jump to d5 at any moment, and it may be a good idea for you in certain positions. So you kind of have more options if you put the knight on a6, not on d7. So you shouldn't be afraid of putting the knight on the edge of the board if it is just a question of one move to improve it, to relocate it, right? So it's a prejudice if you think that, well, every time that your knight occupies a position on the edge of the board is bad. No, it depends. Here, it's not bad. It's even more interesting than knight to d7. Now I think you understand why I am against your move. So knight to d7 is not bad in general, but bishop to g4 looks so much better because you don't limit your pieces that way. All right. And here your opponent made a terrible move. So your opponent played g4. We already know that g4 was vulnerable, right? So your opponent put a pawn on this vulnerable square. So now I want you to stop the video again and answer the same question. What is weak after g4 move? So after g4 move, g4 is not weak because g4 was already quite vulnerable, right? So the fact that there is a pawn on this square, which was vulnerable, doesn't add to the vulnerability of this square, all right? So what is weakened after g4 is squares that this pawn controlled before or could have controlled potentially. So we're talking about squares like f4 and f3, all right? In addition to a vulnerable square g4. So with the help of this h4 and g4 moves, white has weakened a lot, achieving literally nothing. So white is definitely not ready for this attack. This attack could work only if all the pieces are developed, the queen is active, the king is safe, and the pieces are coordinated to deliver the attack. At the moment, white is just pushing pawns. They are not well supported from other pieces, and there is no real target. That's probably the main reason why I don't believe in the power of these operations. But what is really happening here, lots of squares are being weakened. So right now, it was possible to exploit these vulnerabilities almost immediately by playing a simple knight to b6. Moreover, it's a very consistent move, right? As we have discussed, knight has nothing to do on d7, so now it goes to b6, head into d5, from where it will control f4, which was weakened by g4 move, so very logical. And at the same time, bishop is attacking g4, which is vulnerable as well. So you start attacking opponent's weaknesses, which is very good. For example, now, if white plays something like g5, well, you may consider taking on g5. Tactically, it may be quite good. But there is also another thing like bishop to g4. So if you want to avoid all the complications and still get very pleasant position, you may just play bishop g4, ignoring that g5 move, and after rook to g1, you may step back to h5. Once again, your bishop is on the edge of the board, but it's not vulnerable, it's just fine. Now exerting pressure on f3, a square which was weakened by white's g4 move, and now it is occupied by the knight. But as I said before, the fact of having a piece or a pawn on the square which is vulnerable doesn't actually change the vulnerability of this square. It's about different things. So if the square is vulnerable, then the piece which occupies it is also vulnerable. That's the thing. So here, this spin is really annoying. As you can see, your queen may jump to d5 at any moment, and you still have the stress coming from your rook, right? Your bishop can go away, and there will be a problem on the e-file, and you're ready to play c5, and you're ready to play knight d5, so perfect position. But let's come back to f takes g5. I think it's also interesting. So after fg5, hg5, and bishop takes g5, at the very first glance, you're just winning easily, right? But white has this knight e5 move, and it's not that simple, because after bishop takes c1, it's clear if white takes on c1, let's say you just play bishop f5, and you're on time to cover all of your potential vulnerabilities on the king side, you have extra pawn, you have perfect position. But what happens if white plays queen to h5, an intermediate move attacking both f7 and h7? I think you could use this position as a nice tactical exercise. So once again, just stop the video, find the best move for black, and restart the video at any moment you feel like you have a solution. And the solution here is the following. So indeed, we have a problem here as black with h7 and f7, but we also have very nice rook takes e5 check. And the thing is, if d takes e5 here, then we just deliver a checkmate in one. So queen takes e5 is forced, whereafter we already have two minor pieces against the rook, which is just enough. But what's important, we prevented the direct attack against h7 and f7, and now also can take on b2, attacking the rook, and c3, completely destroying white's position. So it's also absolutely fine for you to take on g5 if you want in that position. But I believe that knight b6 was the right approach, very logical and consistent, taking into account white's weaknesses, all right? So you played c5, maybe not bad. Queen went to d3. Again, white is doing everything to actually create new problems for themselves. So cd4, knight captured on d4. And once again, there is another opportunity for you to solve a little exercise. So the task is similar, so just the best move for black. What do you think? And the solution is the following. I guess, again, taking into account the weaknesses white created, the easiest continuation is just knight to e5, attacking the queen and the pawn on g4, right? So it was vulnerable. It was there for a long time. Now we have a simple way to get to it. So if queen simply goes somewhere to a similarly safe position like queen c2 or something, we can just take the pawn, no problems. But if queen goes to g3, we can also exert enormous pressure on the king's position now. So we have bishop to c5. So if we talk about the rest of the game, you can remember that you probably had some problems with finding a good position for your dark squared bishop. Here it is fixed. Like, as you can see, your bishop is just attacking the knight, which is absolutely tangible target. And you combine this with the attack against g4 pawn, and you create some threats like knight to f3, like knight to d3. So literally any jump with the knight will be very dangerous for white. And I think because of that, this position is just very close to completely lost for white. Just one line like bishop e3, you can take the knight. And after something like cd4, you have queen a5 check. And then bishop takes g4, winning the game easily. And if a bishop captures on d4, you have knight to f3, which is also absolutely winning position. So it's a double check, king is forced to d1, then knight takes d4, so on and so forth. So extra material and continuing attack against the king, right? So just a dream position. So you played knight to c5. It's probably not bad, but definitely not the best and not the most ambitious continuation, in my opinion. Queen goes to c2. Bishop captures on g4, although even this is completely winning, to be honest, right? And your opponent played h5. You played bishop to d6 check. Why not? Bishop to e2. You captured the bishop. Pay attention to the fact that you exchanged the light square bishop, which is a defender of light squares. And we have discussed that a bunch of light squares was weakened in white's camp, which is just a great result for black here. Knight captured on e2, and here you made a very strange move, which brings us to another very interesting aspect. So in some of your games, you tend to make, at some point, moves that accomplish literally nothing. So it's very strange, change of the tempo of the fight. So right now, it's clear that black is attacking the king, right? And this sort of advantage, I mean, the bad position of a king is a temporary advantage. So it tends to disappear over time if you don't make ambitious moves, creating new threats, if you don't bring other resources, and so on. So if you are in attack, making a move like h6 looks ridiculous. So it's just a waste of time. Clearly not forced action whatsoever, because there is no threat coming from, let's say, white's h6 move. So what is that? That is nothing. So you can play g6 and that's it. Position is closed, right? Which means that instead of it, you can do something that continues the attack. After the bishop was exchanged, there are other light squares that you have to take into account in order to find the most promising continuation. We were talking about light squares, and we may notice one here. It is the one on d3, which is no longer controlled by the bishop. And it's very natural for black to try to bring the knight there, right? Right now, what is staying on the way is our bishop. And I would have played something like bishop to f8. It looks like a passive move, but look, you solve two problems. So the one is white's potential play along the g file. So now your bishop is here protecting g7, your potentially most vulnerable point. At the same time, you open your queen on the d file to control d3 and d5 squares. So d5 may be used just to bring it there to increase pressure on white's camp in general and attacking something new and bring another rook to the center. And d3 is used for the knight to create this threat. So a multi-purpose move looks very nice to me. After something like bishop to e3, I don't see anything else which is logical for white in this camp. You can play queen d5. Now, if rook goes to g1, for example, you have very nice solution. You can play knight to d3 check, and then even rook takes e3. And if f takes e3, then you can see it's checkmate on f3. So if rook goes elsewhere, like rook h3, then you just bring another rook to the center. You control everything in this position. You're ready to play knight e3. You want to play queen to g2. You have extra pawn, so it's over. And white has no counterplay whatsoever. I don't say that h6 is a terrible mistake. It's just a serious inaccuracy. So now you have to, first of all, always care about this h6 itself, because white is going to attack it. It's harder for you to protect g7 to some extent, and you did nothing to increase pressure on white's position. So you lost time by playing h6. All right, so your opponent responded with the rook to g1, and here you just completely missed that h6 is hanging. So I'm not sure, maybe you were in a time trouble already here, but again, it's about tracking changes. So every opponent's move should be evaluated. So what is the main idea, okay? And of course, noticing something like bishop h6 threats is a question of experience, and it's more like a pattern recognition, so it comes automatically. The more you know, the more you practice and so on. But anyway, at earlier stages, it probably makes sense, of course, if you have time during the game, to ask yourself this simple questions like what has changed, what is coming, so what are the threats, okay? To take into account each and every piece. It may feel a bit boring, but well, it will pay back at some point, I believe. So here, yeah, clearly bishop h6 is a threat, and you made a terrible mistake. You played queen e7, ignoring it, and your opponent could have captured on the h6, where after all of a sudden white is better, because there is also g7, which is going to drop, and you didn't create a threat with the queen e7 move, all right? But your opponent made a terrible mistake in response. So bishop e3 was played. And now you were granted a second chance to actually save the h6. And the easiest way to do that was like to play king h8, for example. It was also possible here after rook g1 immediately. I didn't mention that. So just king h8, right? The easiest way. You go away, g7 is no longer pinned, bishop a6 doesn't exist. That's it. Same here. After bishop e3, just king h8. Why not? Rook a to d8 was played instead, and after bishop to h6, I think that this bishop to h6 may have come as a complete surprise for you, and you have just panicked here, because the move you made loses immediately. I mean, queen f8, it's just a game over. After rook takes g7, you have to take, because there is a checkmate on h7 threatening, and you're just a material down. And what's really ironic here is that white is completing the development finally, so the king runs away. So what was the right move, and probably the only sensible here? It's actually knight to e6, covering the g7. Just like the original bishop h6 possibility, this may have led to bishop captures g7, so white can break through this g file with the help of the sacrifice. So if you take, then there is h6, that's the idea behind it. So like that, and then rook g7 comes and so on. But the thing is, after bishop takes g7, you have a better option. You can actually play knight to g5. And to attack the bishop, you also create a threat of knight to f3, winning some material. What is really cool here, your bishop is ready to jump somewhere maybe to f4, using the fact that knight on e2 is pinned, and you control the d file, stopping white from castling and you start creating threats like, bishop to d2 or maybe rook to d2. So, I mean, white is still worse here, although pawn on h6 was lost and it was not forced. No problem, so keep on playing. If white castles here, instead of taking on g7, just running away on time, you can do the following thing. You can, again, put your knight on g5. This time, attacking both the bishop on h6 and the knight on e2 simultaneously, which forces white to capture on g5. And after f takes g5, black is still slightly better because of the pawn structure, I would say. The thing is, white's pawns are just much more accessible for black pieces compared to black's pawns, and I don't see a concrete weakness in black's camp, to be honest. So material is equal now, but, well, anyway, you have better pawn structure, you have a bishop against the knight, which is sort of advantage in the open position like this one. So I believe black is still better, and that could have been recommended. So just knight e6 and so on. So now let's have a look at some critical moments from other games that you have submitted, just to check if some of the problems we have mentioned in this game look like a pattern. All right, let's get to the other one. For example, in this position, you were playing with black pieces. I'm not going to discuss the quality of this position because, in my opinion, you have completely misplayed the opening stage, as did your opponent, so you were both playing not the best moves. I'm talking about exactly this moment where you played b6 move. So your opponent started with the c4 here, created some pressure in the center, and you responded with the b6, which is in general a good idea because you want to improve your light squared bishop, right? But that was probably not the right moment to do that here because you create a lot of light squared weaknesses, including against your king, all right? Because you weaken a4, e8 diagonal here, and this makes this diagonal really vulnerable, I mean the b6 move, and gives white some additional possibilities that didn't exist just one move ago. So it's hard to imagine some sort of win a4 followed by knight e5 play here when the pawn is on b7, because knight on c6 is easily protected, right? So after b6, it all becomes a reality, which is not needed for you. It doesn't make your position worse, really worse. I mean, b6 is not a catastrophic mistake, but now you have to be really careful about it, and that is about tracking changes. So it's not only about opponent's moves that you have to analyze and ask yourself a question, what has changed and what is weak now. It is also about your moves, but you have to do that before you actually make a move, right? So if you want to make a pawn move, ask yourself a question, what is weak after it? And you have to be aware of these weaknesses, and maybe you should avoid making it, all right? So here after cd5, for example, you might have chosen something like queen d5, I believe, just to prevent white from playing bishop to b5. Which is a part of this plan of attacking the knights and attacking along this a4, e8 diagonal. And then after e5, the move that you made, and bishop to b5, once again, there was your last chance to change something here, because your next move, bishop to b7, was already a decisive mistake, because after knight to e5 and only move protecting the knight, queen to d6, your opponent may have played something like queen c2, and it's over. You're just losing a piece here. So all of this is a result of your b6, pretty much, and you should have taken that into account. So here after bishop b5, for example, you had to play bishop to d7, the only move to save the piece, at least. Position looks ugly, but, well, it's still playable compared to bishop b7, which is losing on the spot. And that is, again, another consideration about tracking changes. So not only after opponent's moves, but also before making your own moves. Just ask yourself a question, what is weak? And it will be just a good starting habit, okay? Let's have a look at the other example. So in this position that has arisen in one of your games, you already have a win-in situation because you're a minor piece up. But you still have to convert it, and when you start making not very good moves, of course, it's really simple to spoil everything. It would be very pity to do that, and it has almost happened in this game at some point. So what to do here? Always when you have something like this on the board, so there is a concrete threat coming from your opponent. This time it is the threat to your e5 pawn. Well, you have a choice, right? So different candidate moves. The same is about the very first game that we have analyzed, right? So there you had at certain moments different possibilities how to continue, right? And you have chosen several moves that were probably not the most promising and so on. And that is about just a comparison that you have to perform. So never choose from the one, just try to, come up with several ideas and choose the best one. So here, for example, e5 is henning. There is no other concrete threat at the moment. So I would have chosen between two. For instance, f4, just a super straightforward move protecting the pawn, in which case your opponent can play something like knight f3, queen f3, and then after that the rook is henning, but he can play rook to f1, no problems, and after queen h5, something like queen e2, simplifying things, because it's probably the easiest for you to explain as many pieces as possible and, win the game. You have extra minor piece after all. And another one is probably even better, but, well, it's a question of taste mainly, but this is the move c3, because the danger is coming from that knight, right? And if you clarify the things with that knight immediately here, there is no danger anymore, right? So in this case, after knight f3, knight takes f3, and queen takes f3, you may simply castle. Also, the problem is solved. e5 is not henning. You have extra minor piece, absolutely winning position. Instead, you played bishop to e2 move because, well, I think you were afraid of something like knight to f3. I don't know. Maybe you didn't notice that there is queen takes e5. Maybe you didn't notice that knight can take the bishop and then queen can take on e5. I have no idea. But bishop e2 is definitely just losing a pawn, which is not needed here at all. It was not forced. So here you played a knight to f3. Interesting move again. After knight takes f3 and bishop f3, you had to predict, though, black's responses using the fact that your knight is pinned, right? So your pawn could have played f5 or d5. In both cases, you have a very nice move, queen to c3, which actually solves the problem because it attacks the queen, and if queen takes queen, you take with a knight, and that's it. The shame is about d5. Doesn't matter, so still queen to c3 is perfect. But the thing is, when you make such a decision, you have to predict it, right? Maybe safer was just to move the knight away somewhere, because you control f3 square twice, so there is no danger to that square at all. All right, that's another thing. And finally, let's flash forward to the later stage in this particular game. So there was this situation. You played quite well during this stage. And then the position was simplified. Now again, you just have the position with the extra a minor piece, right? And your opponent plays e5. And you respond with the h4 move. So this move resembles your h6 move from the first game. Once again, just, you were playing in the center, and now all of a sudden you make a move which accomplishes nothing, absolutely. It's not forced, it's doing nothing, simply, all right? Moreover, there is a concrete threat that's about tracking changes. So after e5, it's not only about preparing the development of the light squared bishop, there is also a threat of playing something like e4. So you have to deal with that threat. And the most natural thing would be here just to play knight to b2. Just going away from that fork, for example. Similar thing is to play bishop g2, but then you have to think of bishop g4 stuff. You don't need it. Why knight b2 is great? Because at the same time with fighting this e4, you offer further simplification of the position, like rook takes d4 and stuff like that. And that is exactly what you need here, just to simplify a position as much as possible to deprive your opponent of any sort of counterplay. That's the point. So you played h4. I mean, it's not the move that is losing the piece, by the way. which is probably surprising, but it doesn't lose a piece. But it's just a mistake of the same spirit like the one you made in the previous game we have analyzed, in the first game that we have analyzed actually, the h6 move that is not connected to the series of previous moves, and that gives you absolutely nothing, all right, at this particular moment. So you should pay attention to moves like that, and you should understand why you're actually making them. What is the reason? So here, your opponent responded with the e4, and you made a serious mistake by taking on e4, because in that case, your opponent regains the minor piece and gets a better ending. So use this as an exercise as well. Try to find a way not to lose a piece in this position, because if you find it, then, well, you find a way how to improve your play dramatically in this particular situation, because you will still have an absolutely winning position. So the solution is the following. You just go away with a knight, because this move attacks the rook, all right? And after rook takes rook, you may consider taking with the rook and then play rook d8, but the easiest, again, just to eliminate any risk, is to take with the bishop and save the bishop at the same time. That's it, game over. You're still a minor piece up, and you have all the chances to win it, all right? So that was probably the most critical mistake in this game, because after that, everything went down. So after rook e4, your opponent gradually got an absolutely winning rook ending, and yeah, you were lost. Okay, so let us summarize at this point the things that I've noticed happening in your play at the moment. So once again, consider tracking changes right after opponent moves. So ask yourself a question, especially after opponent moves: what is weak now? What is vulnerable? Maybe you can exploit it immediately, maybe not, but you just get some valuable information about the position and what was changed in the position, about the position's dynamics. Same as about your moves, but before making the pawn move, especially before making the pawn move, ask yourself a question: what will be weak after this? Maybe you should avoid making this weakening. Who knows? Then avoid making moves like h4 or h6 that accomplish absolutely nothing. But first of all, just make sure to understand the reason why you actually make these moves. And the third one is about candidate moves or candidate ideas even. So usually you have more than one way to solve a certain problem, right? So just try to take your time and find several and just choose from them. Just try to understand which one is the best and, you know, play the best in your opinion. Never try to choose from just one or something, okay? I understand it comes with experience. Sometimes it's hard to tell which one is the best, but you must practice in it. There are many different resources, including Chessfactor videos dedicated to the aspect of you know, weaknesses, candidate moves, decision making and stuff. There are also a lot of other books and so on, but for now you can just try several things. I guess what I have suggested are pretty simple technique to replicate. Just try them, maybe it will help already. Thanks a lot for your attention. I hope this review helped you in some way. We'll be happy to get a feedback from you. Just feel free to share your opinion in comments below. And don't forget to check our social media for new exercises and puzzles. See ya.